A wooden conference hut deep in an East Prussian forest. It's late morning on July 20th, 1944. Adolf Hitler leans over a massive map table, surrounded by his closest military aides. Next to him stands a decorated officer with a black eye patch and a missing right hand, Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg. By his feet, an ordinary-looking brown briefcase. Inside, a powerful bomb, ticking down the seconds. In a matter of minutes, this room will erupt in a deafening blast. Smoke, splintered wood, and bodies will fill the air. For a few frantic hours, the world will believe that Hitler might be dead and that a coup is underway in Berlin. This is Operation Valkyrie, the daring, almost successful attempt by German officers to kill their own Führer and seize control of the Nazi state from within. Today, we're going inside the conspiracy to see how close they came and why, ultimately, they failed. Before we step into that fateful room, we need to understand what Operation Valkyrie actually was and why it's so misunderstood. Many people think of Valkyrie as just the name of the assassination plot, but in reality, it was a real emergency mobilization plan designed by the Nazi regime itself. The idea was simple. If civil unrest, uprisings, or Allied paratroopers threatened Germany from within, the reserve army could quickly seize control of key locations and restore order. Conspirators in the German resistance realized this plan could be twisted into a weapon against Hitler. If they could kill him, they would activate Valkyrie under false pretenses, use loyal troops to occupy Berlin, arrest top Nazi leaders, and present themselves as the new lawful government. In this video, we'll follow the story from smoldering disillusionment inside the Wehrmacht to the moment the bomb explodes, and the brutal crackdown that follows. To understand why German officers plotted to murder their own leader, we have to go back to the early years of the war. In 1939 and 1940, Hitler looked unstoppable. Blitzkrieg crushed Poland, France fell in weeks, and many in the officer corps admired Hitler's boldness, even if they disliked his politics. But as the war dragged on, cracks began to show. Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, turned into a meat grinder. The Eastern Front devoured soldiers and resources. Reports of mass shootings, death camps, and brutal atrocities filtered back from occupied territories. Some officers, steeped in Prussian military tradition, were horrified. They saw Hitler not just as strategically reckless, but morally catastrophic, dragging Germany toward total ruin. Yet open opposition meant death. So, in whispered conversations, secret letters, and quiet meetings in private homes, a small circle of generals, diplomats, and civilians began to ask a forbidden question. Could Hitler be removed by force? The German resistance to Hitler was never a mass movement. It was a patchwork of uneasy allies, conservative aristocrats, church leaders, social democrats, even a few disillusioned Nazis. Many had little in common beyond one conviction: Hitler had to be stopped. At the center of the military conspiracy were figures like General Ludwig Beck, former chief of the General Staff, who had resigned in protest before the war, and Karl Goerdeler, a former mayor of Leipzig who envisioned a post-Nazi Germany reconciled with the West. There were officers in the Abwehr, the military intelligence service, such as Admiral Wilhelm Canaris and Hans Oster, who quietly sabotaged Nazi policies while pretending loyalty. They faced impossible dilemmas. Bombing Hitler risked killing bystanders. Negotiating with the Allies while Hitler lived seemed hopeless. For years, plots failed or fizzled, bombs malfunctioned, opportunities vanished, and potential assassins hesitated at the last second. Into this world stepped Claus von Stauffenberg, a man who, at first glance, seemed an unlikely traitor to Hitler. Born into an aristocratic Catholic family, Stauffenberg was patriotic, conservative, and initially sympathetic to aspects of the regime. But his experiences in the war transformed him. Serving in Poland, France, and North Africa, he saw not just the brutality of combat, but the cruelty of Nazi occupation. Reports of mass killings and the treatment of civilians deeply disturbed him. In 1943, his unit in Tunisia was attacked. He was gravely wounded, losing his right hand, 2 fingers on his left hand, and an eye. While recovering, he fell in with resistance circles. Intelligent, charismatic, and driven, he began to argue that killing Hitler was not only a strategic necessity, but a moral duty. Crucially, his new position in the reserve army would give him rare access to Hitler and to the Valkyrie plan itself. Valkyrie, as originally drafted, was a contingency plan to protect the Nazi regime from internal chaos. It authorized the reserve army, based in Berlin under General Friedrich Fromm, to deploy units to secure government buildings, communications centers, and key infrastructure in case of uprisings. Stauffenberg and his allies realized that if they could rewrite the orders, they could turn Hitler's own emergency plan into a coup blueprint. The revised Valkyrie orders described an alleged SS revolt and instructed reserve army units to arrest not just SS leaders, but top Nazi officials: Himmler, Goebbels, even Hitler's closest allies. On paper, it all looked entirely legal, bearing Hitler's forged signature. The genius of the plan was its bureaucratic camouflage. Unsuspecting officers would believe they were defending the regime when in fact they were dismantling it. All that remained was the most dangerous step of all, actually killing Hitler, then triggering Valkyrie before the truth caught up. Here lay the core dilemma. Hitler was heavily guarded and paranoid, yet his schedule still required in-person briefings. Several earlier assassination attempts had already failed. Bombs didn't detonate, planes were canceled, and assassins lost their nerve. By mid-1944, time was running out. The Allies had landed in Normandy. The Eastern Front was collapsing. The conspirators feared that if they waited any longer, Germany would be utterly destroyed, and the Soviet Union would overrun all of Europe. Stauffenberg, now Chief of Staff to the Reserve Army Commander, had a rare opportunity. He was one of the few officers regularly summoned to Hitler's briefings. Despite his injuries, he volunteered to plant the bomb himself. It was a terrifying decision. He would have to arm the device, place it near Hitler, somehow excuse himself from the room, and then survive long enough to reach Berlin and launch Valkyrie. Every second would count. The bomb chosen for the mission was British-made plastic explosive, smuggled into Germany by resistance contacts. Stauffenberg would carry it in a standard-issue brown leather briefcase, along with documents to avoid suspicion. The detonator was a pencil fuse, a small device containing a glass vial of acid that, once crushed, would gradually corrode a wire and trigger the explosion after about 10 minutes. Because he had only 3 functioning fingers, arming the bomb was painfully slow. Normally, 2 charges were to be prepared, doubling the destructive power. But on the crucial day, time and circumstance would intervene, forcing him to set only 1. The plan was simple, in theory. Place the briefcase as close to Hitler as possible, leave the room under a plausible pretext, wait for the explosion, then radio Berlin to announce Hitler's death and initiate Valkyrie. In practice, every detail was vulnerable to chance. July 20th, 1944. Hitler's field headquarters, known as the Wolfschanze, or Wolf's Lair, buzzed with activity. Originally, the briefing was to be held in an underground concrete bunker where a bomb's blast would have been devastating. But a heat wave changed everything. To keep the room cooler, the meeting was moved to a lightly built wooden hut with windows open to the summer air. Stauffenberg flew in with his adjutant, Werner von Haiften, carrying the briefcase. In a side room, he excused himself to freshen up, hurriedly arming the bomb with immense difficulty. Pressed for time, he managed to prime only 1 charge before being summoned. Inside the briefing hut, a long oak table dominated the room, cluttered with maps. Stauffenberg placed the briefcase near Hitler on the far side of a heavy table leg, then asked to step out for a phone call. Outside, he and Haiften made for their car, hearts pounding. At 12:42 p.m., the bomb exploded. The blast tore through the wooden hut, blowing out windows, ripping apart walls, and shattering the conference table. Smoke, dust, and screams filled the air as flames licked at splintered beams. 4 people would ultimately die from their injuries, and many more were wounded. But Hitler was not among them. Several small factors combined to save his life. Moments after Stauffenberg left, an officer, seeking a better view of the maps, had casually moved the briefcase to the opposite side of the thick oak table leg. When the device detonated, that sturdy support acted as a shield, deflecting much of the blast away from Hitler. Hitler was thrown, his trousers shredded, eardrums damaged, his arm injured. But he could stand and speak. Within hours, Nazi propaganda would triumphantly portray his survival as proof of divine protection. Believing the explosion had surely killed everyone in the room, Stauffenberg and Haeften raced from the Wolf's Lair, bluffing their way past checkpoints and boarding a plane back to Berlin. During the flight, they began transmitting word that Hitler was dead. But back in the capital, confusion reigned. General Ulbricht and other conspirators hesitated, waiting for confirmation. Hours were lost. General Fromm, nominal head of the reserve army, and a man trying to protect himself, waffled and threatened to arrest them if Hitler lived. Meanwhile, in East Prussia, news spread that Hitler had survived, and loyalists began calling Berlin. Despite this, parts of Valkyrie were activated. Reserve units moved to occupy ministries, radio stations, and key buildings. Some officers believed they were suppressing an SS coup. Others sensed something far more dangerous was unfolding. The entire coup now hinged on speed, clarity, and above all, the perception that Hitler was truly dead. As afternoon turned to evening, the coup began to unravel. In Berlin, Joseph Goebbels was still free, operating from his propaganda ministry. Using secure lines, he contacted loyal commanders and spread the word. Hitler had survived and was already speaking. When Major Otto Ernst Rehmer, commanding troops in Berlin, arrived to arrest Goebbels under Valkyrie orders, something crucial happened. Goebbels handed him the phone. On the line, Adolf Hitler himself, alive, furious, but very much in command. Hitler promoted Rehmer on the spot and ordered him to crush the coup. From that moment, momentum reversed. Units that had occupied Berlin's centers of power now retreated or switched sides. Confused soldiers realized they had been misled. In the Bendler block, the conspirators frantically tried to regain control, but their window of opportunity had closed. With Hitler alive, their legal and moral justification evaporated in the eyes of most officers. Late that night, July 20th, slid into the early hours of the 21st. Inside the Bendler block, the atmosphere turned desperate. Stauffenberg, Ulbricht, and their fellow conspirators argued over what to do. Outside, loyal troops, loyal to Hitler, surrounded the complex. Shots were fired in the courtyard. A brief firefight erupted. General Fromm, eager to distance himself from treason, abruptly switched sides. He ordered the arrest of Stauffenberg and the core plotters, pretending he had just uncovered the conspiracy. A hasty drumhead court-martial was convened. Within hours, in the courtyard lit by headlights, Stauffenberg, Ulbricht, Werner von Haeften, and Albrecht Merz von Quirnheim were executed by firing squad. Stauffenberg's reported last words were, "Es lebe das heilige Deutschland. Long live our sacred Germany." The coup had failed, but Hitler's paranoia now exploded. A brutal wave of reprisals was only beginning. In the weeks and months that followed, the Nazi regime unleashed a merciless purge. The Gestapo, aided by intercepted letters, diaries, and confessions under torture, rolled up the entire resistance network. Show trials at the People's Court, presided over by the raging judge Roland Freisler, humiliated defendants before sending them to slow, agonizing executions. Around 4,980 people were killed in connection with the July 20th plot. Yet Operation Valkyrie changed how history remembers Nazi Germany. It shattered the myth that no Germans resisted. While many conspirators held deeply conservative or even problematic views, They chose to risk everything to end a criminal regime they believed was destroying their country and Europe. Their failure ensured that Hitler remained in power until the bitter end, prolonging the war and the Holocaust. But their moral stance, however late and flawed, forces us to confront difficult questions about responsibility, courage, and the cost of inaction. Operation Valkyrie has echoed through films, books, and public memory, often simplified into a clean story of good Germans versus evil Nazis. The truth is messier and more human. Many conspirators were patriots who had once supported Hitler or shared some of his goals. Their resistance came late, after years of war and atrocity. Yet in the end, they chose treason to end a greater crime. So what do we take from this? That authoritarian regimes can be challenged from within, but only at enormous personal risk. That waiting for a perfect moment or perfect heroes may mean waiting too long, and that ordinary individuals, flawed and compromised, still face moral choices that shape history. If you found this deep dive helpful, consider subscribing for more long-form history breakdowns. Let me know in the comments. How should we remember Stauffenberg and his fellow conspirators, heroes, opportunists, or something in between?